Hello, I'm Ananth Narayanan, the chairperson of Flow Mumbai. Welcome to the second webinar in collaboration with SP Jain. The topic selected for this session is around the growth pathway for businesses in the current situation. Businesses need to survive and reinvent themselves so they can create a growth plan for the future. Beginning of 2020, we were told that oil and gas prices would not drop despite the increasing competitive economics of electric mobility. We were also told that developed countries could not change their behaviors and had to maintain the same level of travel and consumption. Yet here we are today with negative oil prices and virtually all flights grounded all around the world. How much longer will we be in denial that the world is changing and that we need to change as well? Let us look at the MSME sector in India, for example. It is the key driver for job growth, innovation, and acts as an incubator for new companies. MSMEs contribute to almost 45% of India's GDP and are suffering because of both supply and demand issues, and many of them cannot survive this crisis unless substantial support is immediately available. In May, the government announced a 20 lakh crore Atmanirbhar package, including a slew of measures to support the sector. Will implementing these be easy? And also, will the distribution of financial aid be effective given the challenges of identifying and targeting those who need it the most? How are businesses clawing their way back past survival and into growth? Notwithstanding the challenging picture we see, there is a lot being done to address these issues, and we have subject matter experts who can throw some light on the ground realities. What can be better than an academician, a banker, and the head of an MSME forum talking to us about it with a veteran journalist moderating the same? A quick introduction of the panelist. Ananth Narayanan is the Associate Professor at SP Jain Institute of Management and Research. A veteran in the financial sector, he has worked in key banks, including Standard Chartered, Deutsche Bank, and Citibank. Rajeev Ahuja is the Executive Director at RBL Bank and brings over 32 years of experience in the financial services industry. Rajeev holds an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. Sucheta Shah is the Promoter Director of Atlas Integrated Finance Limited. She is the chairperson of the Maharashtra State FICCI MSME sector. Indrajit Gupta, our moderator, is an award-winning editor and a journalist. He is the co-founder of Founding Fuel Publishing. Thank you all for being a part of the session. And before I hand over to Indrajit, please key in your questions during the course of the event, and it will be taken up during the Q&A session. Over to you, Indrajit.
Thank you, Malu. Hello and a warm welcome to all of you at the Mumbai chapter of FICCI Flow, SPJIMR, my alma mater, and other guests who've chosen to join this webinar this evening. I'd like to also welcome our distinguished panelists. Perhaps you could kind of raise your hand and say hi to the audience when I introduce each one of you one by one. Ananth, hi Ananth.
Hi Indrajit, hi.
Hi, welcome. Rajeev, hi Rajeev.
Hi Indrajit. Hi. Good to be here.
Welcome to this session. And finally, Sucheta.
Yeah.
Hi Sucheta.
Hi Indrajit.
Thank you. Welcome to the session. Let me spend a few minutes just setting context and explaining how we plan to run this conversation and what might we possibly accomplish at the end of it, because that's important. My team and I have been part of many deeply reflective and thoughtful conversations with some of the best minds from the world of business across many industries, from real estate to retail to apparel, technology, agriculture, and many others. We've reported deeply from inside corporate war rooms as well. We studied shifts in consumer behavior and the churn in sectors like labor because of reverse migration and the impact that it has had on jobs and livelihoods. And based on that work, I can tell you two things that are now amply clear to me. One, no one saw it coming. And two, no one knew what to do when the crisis first hit. There's no playbook available to deal with the challenge of a pandemic and the resultant lockdown. So the question that we've got to ask ourselves is, what do we do in these difficult times? As a leader, do you allow yourself to feel dejected, frustrated, and helpless, and perhaps start blaming the government, your own customers, your internal organization, suppliers, the regulator? I find many leaders and organizations that are still in that zone, and they desperately want normalcy to return. But the moot point is, will it? Or are we destined to accept this as the new normal? I don't know the answer, but I do know that there are two key leadership tasks in building this new playbook that we're looking for to deal with the pandemic. One is the task of grappling with the operational aspects of the crisis, even as they continue to evolve, whether it's about managing cash, the difficult task of letting go of people, getting your supply chain back up, etc., etc. The second leadership task, and perhaps just as important, if not more, is to prepare for a post-COVID world, because every crisis invariably throws up new opportunities for you to pull ahead of the pack, to reimagine market spaces in fundamentally different ways, even if those opportunities today may seem a bit fuzzy and uncertain. I know, I think fundamentally the first leadership task is relatively intuitive, we all get it. But the second one, which is about reimagining, is a little less obvious. And I find that many business leaders and CEOs spend an inordinate amount of time and their energy firefighting to settle things down in their organizations, right? While that is critical, it isn't sufficient. So this evening, we will tackle both these leadership tracks and hear from our panelists how to get on top of these operational challenges that this pandemic has thrown at us and how to perhaps approach them differently. But equally important, how should you set agenda and not be reactive? How do you push the boundaries of what is possible? Because there is both an opportunity, and you'll hear this from the panelists as well, and a need to reset and reboot the way that you do business, so that when the crisis abates, your business is actually in a stronger and better place. That then is the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, this evening. As Malu mentioned, even as this conversation rolls on, do remember to key in your questions that strike you in the chat box, and we'll get the panelists to answer a few questions towards the end of this session. So I'll, without much ado, invite Ananth, Rajeev, and Sucheta to share their initial thoughts for a couple of minutes each on the theme of today's conversation, because each of them have their own lens of looking at the evolving situation. Let's start with you, Ananth. What are you seeing?
Good evening, Indrajit, and thank you for those lovely opening comments. I think you've kind of laid the picture very, very well. And by the way, welcome back to your alma mater, even if it's virtually. Greetings, Rajeev. Good to connect again. Greetings, Sucheta, and thank you, Malu and FICCI Flow. Look, I think you've set the context very well. The way I would look at it is the following. First, this is a very, very deep crisis. And in many, many ways, this is possibly the worst economic crisis of our lifetimes. I know this sounds dramatic. I know this sounds like trying to sensationalize, but it's as real as it can get, right? So the first thing one has to do is take stock of reality and be aware of what the context really is, right? Once we see what the context really is, it will be clear to us that survival, and you mentioned about firefighting, survival has to be a big, big part of many, many businesses. Now, I'm talking generally here. Of course, there are businesses which are not impacted. We are still seeing, in software, for instance, or in pharmaceuticals, for instance, we are seeing companies doing reasonably. But I'm talking about the average company. The first question is about survival and making sure that we live to fight another day, right? And by the way, many, many companies might not survive the next 12 months, and that's the brutal issue. So that part has to be very clear. It's about survival. Thereafter, what do you do about ensuring survival? Some amount of help from the government will be required. While it is wrong to look at other people for help and to expect that other people will solve your problems, the reality is every economy, whether it's the US, whether it's Japan, whether it's Europe or Australia, in every place, we are seeing the need for people to come in and help businesses and livelihoods. Therefore, even in India, as you mentioned, there is a package ongoing. There is more to come and more help is required. What has to be done, I think, is through organizations like FICCI, we have to make a cogent case so that a government which is willing to help can respond in a manner which is useful to everybody, right? So that's the critical part of the survival part. which is making sure that we explain to the government what can be done and we sort of get the buy-in for those short-term steps to be taken. Second, as you rightly mentioned, as part of this survival part, there are opportunities coming up as well. One big opportunity is actually in the rural economy, which, by the way, is turning out to be an actual bright spot, a silver lining in the overall landscape. So at a time, and by the way, rural economy accounts for 65% of India's population and about 45% of India's GDP, right? So a combination of rural employment guarantee schemes, NREGA, a combination of good procurement by Food Corporation of India, a combination of good monsoons and prospects of a good agriculture makes all of this put together, makes the rural economy look good. So if you can divert products to the rural sector, where, by the way, the fear of COVID is also less, try and do that. You will find some opportunities there. Medium to long term, lots of takeaways. I think key messages would be formalize, improve your governance, and understand what it is that is required to survive going forward. As you rightly mentioned, every business is going to change. The nature of business is going to change. And in the medium term, you have to prepare for those changes. So very broadly put, understand the context. The numbers aren't looking great. They're looking terrible, in fact. Survive, and that part of the survival will be, of course, lobbying to the government in a cogent manner, because you will require help. All of us will require help. There are opportunities coming up in the economy as well. More medium term, there are some, absolute structural changes which are required in the way which we do businesses, and we can discuss them as we go along.
Terrific. You've set the context beautifully. I'm picking up 3 or 4 strands just to ensure that we pick them up later. One was the point you made about learning to work with the government in a coherent, cohesive sort of way. We'll certainly pick that up because I'm sure it'll be of interest to all the participants of this webinar. The other was you spoke about a few opportunities, especially the rural opportunity was very interesting to hear, and we'll probably focus on that and try and understand that. And the last 2 points you made was, one, the need for formalization, right? What that might entail, we'll dive into that as well, and the governance challenge. I'll come back to all of this. Rajeev, the ball is with you.
Great, Indrajit. Thanks, and thanks, Ananth, for setting a very good context. And I think it's useful the way you all have divided it, what's to be done here and now, and what really has to be kept in mind from a medium long-term perspective. And unfortunately, both have to go hand in hand. So I do agree the first focus should be conserving cash, getting your operations down to where you think you can afford the next 12 odd months of a fairly low transaction economy. I mean, it might become better, but I think you just have to plan. And also then I think the third element is communication, because I think these are times when all your stakeholders, you yourself, your employees, your customers, are all in a similar uncertain, anxious frame of mind. And that anxiety has probably, gone to its peak maybe for the next few months, and then it'll come down. And I think whatever we do in these 3-4 months, and whatever the challenges ahead of us, what you communicate, how you communicate is going to be very important, because ultimately those relationships will come back. Everybody will, hopefully in varying stages come back to business, and I think, so we find that even as you go through your exercise of managing cash flow, looking to pare down your operations, I mean, these are very brutal things. I can assure you, for a big, medium and small enterprise, there's nothing. And if you're lucky enough to pivot, and I'll give you some stories of how some of our clients have pivoted, even in these times. If that's great, then fantastic. But I think you have to accept that the next 6-12 months is going to be very painful, and whatever pain has to be taken. But how you plan for the post-COVID environment, I think is going to be very, very critical. And therefore, communication, planning, and I'll walk you through some of the things we ourselves are doing. I mean, we're a bank, but we have to be equally, alive and sensitive to what's happening around us because our clients are facing the same. So I'll walk you through some of those steps, which I think some of our clients are doing and we are seeing and we're doing ourselves.
Terrific. Rajeev, three things that I took away. One is cash conservation, which is critical, otherwise you won't survive, right? If you run out of cash. Leadership and communication, from your perspective, is a critical agenda item, and we'll dive into that as well. And third, I think, and allied to that is the anxiety epidemic that you spoke about or alluded to in some ways. And then finally, thinking about your customer as well, because you're in some ways, also need to think about what the customers doing as well in some cases. So how do you build that customer centricity at a time when customers are getting hammered as well? So we'll come back to all of those issues for sure. That's very much part of the agenda. I'm hoping we'll be able to cover enough ground. Sucheta, next, please, your perspective.
Thank you, Indrajit. Nice to be connected to SP Jain again. And hello, Mr. Ananth Narayanan and Mr. Ahuja. I would like to put it into the three main sectors of our economy: manufacturing, service, and agriculture. So putting these in the context of our theme, survive, revive, and thrive. So it is the industrial which is struggling to survive and is in the survive mode. They are facing major three problems, the three L's: labor, liquidity, and logistics support. So there are a lot of government special packages. In fact, yesterday the state government is saying that they will even try to protect salaries. But the manufacturing, the industrial companies will have to work indigenously on cost cutting, innovations, technology. Coming to the service sector, it is in the revive mode. It is, they got stuck for the first initial 1 or 2 weeks, but then they all adopted to the new normal. They adapted to the change, the technology, and now they can service not only just people in India, but anywhere in the world. However, you cannot generalize because there are industries like the tourism and the hospitality industry, which are still in the survival mode, and they need to really go for some plan B, and it may take some time. But there are service sectors like the IT sector, which is growing leaps and bounds. I know a small IT company which is into virtual display, and which is that is the need of the hour, because you cannot go to the malls, you cannot go, so you want that feeling, the virtual feeling, the actual feeling. So he's in fact working all night just to be able to service his clients. So that is the service. And coming to agriculture, that is thriving because food is necessity, and all the packages, the government, and the direct benefits of crop and cash to the farmers is helping them. The rural economy is seeing the green shoots, which is very good. And I also see the migrant labor which has gone back. Some of them have gone back into farming. In fact, I know one of them, so I called him up that, are you okay? You must be. No, he said that I've gone back to agriculture, I've gone back to farming, and he's happy. So some people are, so agriculture is thriving. So what we really need to work on is the industrial, the manufacturing, which needs, if survive, revive, and thrive will come automatically. So that's what then we can.
That's great. So then you talked about those three L's that struck in my head: labor, liquidity, and logistics. I'll pick up one of those L's, which is liquidity. And I know, Sucheta, you spoke to me about what you were picking up from other flow members across the 17 chapters, right? And how liquidity was proving to be one of the biggest challenges for most enterprises, right? And I'll come to Ananth and Rajeev on that as well. But give us a sense of what you were picking up, for the simple reason that what really is the liquidity challenge really all about, and what were they telling you? Because I speak to a lot of VCs, and when they started working with the portfolio companies as soon as the crisis started, right, to try and stretch their cash position from, let's say, about 8 months to about at least 18 months of cash, so that you can kind of get into some kind of a zone of safety. But what are you picking up from your vantage point as a flow member when you speak to other members and you see things around you?
As what I am picking up is that a lot of flow members, not just flow members, I would talk about entrepreneurs also, who are budding or who are in the growth format. They try to go for these packages, this not just the government, they try to approach with all these the loans, the working capital, but at times, everybody is very positive. But what happens is that things just get stuck in between. So when they get stuck, they really don't know where to approach. So if there is a transparency in that approach, I'm even talking about VCs and PEs. I'm in touch with a lot of PEs also. At times, what happens is that you are not aware what is the reason that it is not going ahead, why you're not getting the funding. So at times, funding becomes a big problem. At times, your inventory stuck for a small technical snag. There are small technical snags. So if that awareness is created, if that handholding is done, if the connection is better, then I'm sure the liquidity problems would not, because there are fantastic schemes and there is government, there are government. It's just that even so many P's funding, but it is just that the connection needs to become a little stronger.
Right, right. So I'll move that to Ananth and Rajeev. You heard Sucheta talk about why businesses obviously need to conserve cash and extend the cash cycle, but bank funding is a big pain point, especially for MSMEs and small enterprises.
Sure.
There are many government schemes for sure, but when you kind of opt for one of those schemes, it gets stuck somewhere. There may be a systemic issue that you might want to talk about rather than a specific case or two, Rajeev, and then maybe we'd come to Ananth.
Yeah, I think, look, you're right. The way the scheme was initially framed, and I think we've had a lot of conversations with the government. They've been extremely, extremely forthcoming and dynamic in terms of how the changes are happening. In fact, almost every 2-3 days, we have a review session with the Ministry of Finance on all these efforts. Now, I think the pace is picked up. Look, it will never be enough. So, for every one good story, there'll probably be 5 stories which are not so good. I mean, and let's face it, there will be limitations. But I think the wheels have started moving, albeit slowly, but I think they're gathering pace. The other thing which is happening is that I think many intermediaries, NBFCs, especially focused in the impact area, so microfinance, MSME, have got a lot of funding. I think there is a section of NBFCs which are perhaps are stuck for refinance, but a big section which we work with on the impact side. So I know many MSME focused companies which have started their operations all over again, and this is more towards the smaller end of the MSME, more the micro and really the small part. And I think that's an attractive area where we are seeing liquidity and equity come back, in fact, quite strongly. Because these are, again, markets where on a 5-10 year basis, you will be able to create enough franchise and distribution. So I think where we are seeing, challenges is really, I think, if there are multiple lenders to the borrower, and there are differing stages of their thinking process, approval process. So these things kind of get dragged. And I think from the bank side, all of us now are geared up to address that. But like I said, the pace will only keep quickening. And I know that over the next few weeks, you'll see many more contours being added to this scheme so that we can genuinely help the small business as much as we can.
So I'm guessing that the demand far outstrips the supply, and it always has been as far as MSME funding is concerned.
Yeah.
What's likely to change, Rajeev? I mean, more specifically?
No, so I think segments which have been, kind of kept away, so we've asked for micro enterprises, which are in the smaller parts of India, okay, where outreach is a challenge. Those have been kind of also being addressed. We've asked for, in the villages, some of these smaller enterprises, probably, nobody reaches out to them. So we've asked for them to be addressed. Also, some of the processes which were put in place earlier were with a certain design frame. They have been also changed along the way. So I think in our own journey in the last 5-6 weeks, we've come from almost nothing to somewhat better. And I know that in 3-4 weeks, we'll do even more. And I think as time goes by, and I'm seeing that similar feedback from other banks as well, that they've really revved it up. And my sense is this has to be a continued process. This cannot just be, just end by this date, because
right.
I think we'll continue needing this.
Rajeev, so if for this, to help this audience a bit, what are 2 or 3 things that entrepreneurs here who are part of this conversation need to do so that they understand what banks are specifically looking for? And I'll turn this to Ananth as well. But from your lens, what are some of the things, practical things that entrepreneurs can
look? I think what we need really is an assessment on what's the new business plan. I mean, in some level of detail, but not too much. We need to understand, because ultimately we are also a fiduciary for this exercise. We have our own lending, but we also a fiduciary. So we need to understand how, let's say, if you were to able to get an additional 20% funding, what does it do for your business in 6 months, 12 months? And I think that kind of conversation that helps us make quicker assessments. We ourselves have done our own, desktop analysis based on the data we have and the financials we hold. And then we're going out and reaching out to some of these people to have this conversation. But and the more these people are prepared, you will have a faster resolution of these kind of things. And I know that we've given a lot only because we've managed to pull our own machinery faster. And then the clients too have been responding.
Right. No, so MSME funding, Ananth, is a big ticket item, clearly. And I know you spoke very passionately about some of the changes that the MSMEs themselves have to do, while the banks certainly have to step up, as Rajeev was mentioning. MSMEs itself need to do a few structural changes in the way that they look at data and governance and all of that. Just walk us through what your thoughts are on that, Ananth.
If you permit me, Indrajit, I'm going to take it the reverse order.
Okay.
So look, and I think Sucheta spoke extremely well about the liquidity issues overall. I'm just going to add a different dimension to that. What we are talking about, this particular scheme, 3 lakh crore scheme, is essentially providing funding to MSMEs. Now, Sucheta is right that several companies are actually doing well, particularly in the agri sector, for instance, or in services like tech, etc. But let's face it, the overall economy, given the nature of where we are right now, could actually shrink by double digits in this year. We could see a double-digit contraction this year. That's a severe shock, which we've not seen before, which means many companies are going to be hit very, very badly. Some research indicates as many as 20% of India's 63 million MSMEs could face a life-threatening issue. This is not small numbers. Now, these are issues on top line and bottom line. Basically, the problem that the MSMEs have is they don't have money coming in terms of earnings. It's not just a funding issue. Giving them liquidity at this point of time is not the only solution, which is where I think FICCI with the government, and all of us actually need to work with the government to find ways in which money can be given to the bottom line of the company or contribute to the bottom line of the company. Now, it's easier said than done. The reality is there is a limited pot available with the government. Now, the government is doing a good job of making sure rural employment guarantee scheme works, that money is given through this, PM Yojanas, etc., so that, there is no question of distress, humanitarian distress. People have what is required for food security, for basic requirements. Likewise, basic security for companies is also required. And this is easier said than done. One thing which could work, and maybe this is where some cogent, lobbying could help, some kind of interest subvention, which means that actually for the 6 months of this fiscal year, 0 interest on all loans, and the interest cost is borne by the government. I know it sounds bizarre, but these are bizarre times. And by the way, this is a proposal that even people like Dr. Rakesh Mohan have suggested, which I think makes a lot of sense. It does not cost too much. So there is 20 lakh crores of outstanding MSME loans. So the total annual interest cost, assuming 12% interest, is about 2.4 lakh crores. 6 months would be 1.2 lakh crores. That's about 0.6% of GDP. Something like that would not cost the government too much, but would actually help the bottom lines of the companies, and interest costs can be a substantial cost for many of these players. So that's one particular part. On the second part, on the modalities of this liquidity framework itself, and Rajeev, I think, covered it extremely well. I'll add a couple of layers to that. One is, think of it from the banker's perspective. As Rajeev said, there is a fiduciary responsibility for the bankers, which means that the way in which the guarantee works is that supposing the MSME defaults after a period of time, the money does not come automatically from the government. Only a part of that money will come in. Thereafter, you have to go through the recovery process, demonstrate that you're doing enough work, and only then the money will come. It's not a smooth process from a banker's perspective. The other issue is 60% of banking is public sector banking. And their whole of the banking sector, by the way, is going to grapple with non-performing assets. Already before COVID-19, the level of non-performing assets was quite high. The actual non-performing assets could go up to as high as 18 to 20% of advances. It's not a small number, it's a gigantic number. So imagine a banker giving out loans at this point in time, and especially the public sector bank, worried about CVC, CAG, CBI coming after them if a loan happens to go bad. Now, it's unlikely that will happen with a MSME loan, but nevertheless, the fear is definitely there. Your NPAs are looking pretty bad, and they're doing well. Do you really want to give out money right now? So what, to the point that Rajeev was making, what could be done is give comfort to the bankers. Which is the point about the longer term governance and the, make things a lot more formalized. If you can tell the company and give a cogent kind of plan saying as to how this will impact your bottom line, how are you seeing things plan out over the next 6 months? And if the numbers stack up, if you have a good auditor, if all your transactions are electronic, you're there on GST, you're there on, you don't do any cash transaction below about 10,000 rupees. If all of that is there and you have good governance, the comfort for the banker to be able to lend will increase dramatically. At this point of time, I can tell you, Indrajit, there is a huge trust deficit amongst bankers as well. People don't know whom to trust.
That's a critical one. I just wanted to pick up the threads on that, and I wanted to hear Rajeev and Sucheta as well on that, because you make three very important points. One was the last one, which is quality of data and improving and toning up governance. Rajeev, do you want to kind of respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if my recipe for revival and thriving is predicated a lot on getting more formalization and information asymmetries. I mean, today, if you see, lending to any business in India, is a challenge in terms of figuring out what the real numbers are, what the real situation is, and therefore it goes into a lot of expenses to be done just to suss things out. And I think, as we've seen in the consumer sector, the improvement in data and risk modeling has become a lot more, so today you will not find much challenge in the consumer side, as you probably would have seen 10, 20 years ago, that you don't get, adequate credit or home finance. Even microfinance, in fact, that's an industry which is only about 10 years into the post-AP world, Andhra Pradesh world, where we have a better framework. We have Aadhaar, we have now a very active bureau, we have lot of providers, and there is a whole lot of risk modeling we are now able to do using a lot of data. I think the MSME segment has eluded that for quite some time. So the costs of access, the lack of trust, and therefore we all look for collateral because that's the only way to keep the relationship, above board and honest. So if we have to, get into a revival and a thriving mode eventually, this is the cornerstone of building this, because I can tell you that the amount of capital, both debt and equity, which can come into this business. And we've been doing this business at the smaller end, at the micro end, at the semi-urban end for the last 10 years. I mean, we have about 100,000, micro enterprises borrowing between 2 lakhs and, 10 lakhs across India, and we have armies of people. And now, if we can build better data models, and many of them don't even fully bank. So the cost of doing that business is high, but we are yet doing it. So I think if we can get there, I think there's an enormous opportunity that as you go through this period, obviously there's a huge amount of business model reset. And there are other elements here which can actually help us. And, I'm maybe jumping the gun here, but I'll wait for the next round.
I'll come to that, the business model reset bit, but I wanted to kind of pick up the threads on the point you made about collaterals and securitization in some ways. I mean, collateral-based funding has been the predominant mode, but there was an opportunity that Aadhaar and GST would have provided for people to borrow on the basis of their cash flows, right? But somehow that never happened. Very simply, what went wrong? or what didn't happen, and what can be done?
Yeah, so I think the enterprise level GST data is still very early days. In fact, I think we need to have permissions of the borrower to actually access that data. Okay. That's one, and we need a continuous access to the data because life changes almost daily. I know that now there is a move by most banks under the aegis of IBA that wherever the lending is above a certain limit, we will have access to the GST data, and that should be part of the agreement with the borrower. Okay, because until the borrower agrees, we cannot access that data, initially. So I think that's a critical part. I think the GST itself was settling down, but I think that can become a very, very important part of, what we used to call flow-based lending. So where we actually see supply chain and financial flows, and then we can predicate. In fact, we do a lot of business there already, where we don't rely on GST, but we rely on other forms of commercial relationship or aggregation or platform models. Now, if you take that, use digital as a way to get them tighter, and then impose a certain layer of GST data, I think you can build this business. I mean, we've done it on a small scale. We are a little bit concerned trying to take it very, very high, but I think all of these are feasible, and the starting position is that most of enterprises need to adopt a large amount of transparency and governance in the way they deal. And therefore, it also behooves that the rules of business for them become easier. That's the flip side, and that's the preserve of the governments, hopefully, which will also come in place.
Well, we'll come back to that because it's a very important piece. I wanted to pick up the threads on what Ananth spoke about, developing a cohesive and a coherent lobbying strategy with the government, because Sucheta, the big challenge has been across industries, across businesses, that we tend to have a very fragmented approach, right? Within a large industry, there are multiple associations and multiple bodies all jockeying for different things, and the government is confused as a result. You heard Ananth talk about a way that one can arrive at something that the government feels is not meant for this one industry or the other, but actually is can be a practical answer to at least ameliorate part of the misery. It's not going to make a huge difference. Subvention, the point aspect being itself.
Yeah. In fact, FICCI had recommended a lot of MSME initiatives and incentives, and most of them have been taken. In fact, this last package which has been given has, they have collateral-free loans. They have, with interest rate cap, subordinate debt, which would be converted to quasi-equity. In fact, NBFCs have been flushed with liquidity, and also equity infusion. So where the interest and all doesn't come into the picture. So I also feel that equity infusion is also equally important, and government is taking. It's just that we need to go together and give a little more. We are giving recommendations. FICCI is doing that with most of and we are having even talks with the government. So they are showing it in the packages, and it is coming. And I also feel that the listing of companies, the equity funding is also what we can work. We just don't need to work on the debt. Maybe the equity would help them come out, the equity infusion.
Sure. So Ananth, on that note, just wanted you to come in on this whole issue of the business model reset, because to get what Sucheta is talking about, bring in equity infusion, you've got to position your firm very differently. We touched upon it, I know. You spoke about governance, and Rajeev spoke about it as well. Do you want to kind of elaborate and talk about the few things that entrepreneurs need to think about if they have to move to the next level of formalization?
Sure. I'd break this up into two parts, Indrajit. Yes. For a business reset, you also need to look at how your business will be beyond COVID-19, right? And anyway, there are lots of changes happening with automation, with machine learning and all of that. And now this COVID-19 is throwing a new googly in the whole works, which means for many, many businesses, life after COVID-19 will be very, very different. This also throws up opportunities along with threats. So I know personally, and I know going into anecdotes kind of misses the point because you can't extrapolate from there. But I know of companies which have pivoted into areas which are profitable at this point in time. So I know forging companies, for instance, which went through really miserable April and Mays when the entire businesses on the auto side closed up. But now they've gone into providing stuff into FMCG or into making of ventilators, etc. Essentially into areas which are still active at this point in time. So you try and pivot your business for the short term. Similarly, for the medium to long term as well, you can see new areas develop. For instance, I think it's going to be very clear that health and infrastructure and things like education, etc., will be a huge focus area for the next few years. Similarly, IT is going to be a huge focus area for the next few years. So pivoting your own business strategy, realigning them with what is going to be a siege is one big part of it. If we had the answers, frankly, we wouldn't be wasting our time on the webinar. We would be out making money. But this is something every business has to think about. In terms of the way of doing business, and I completely endorse with what Rajeev just said. Here is a takeaway I have, or a suggestion I have for every business. And it might sound naive, it might sound very idealistic. Become absolutely clean in terms of governance. Look, a lot of the question that you asked, Rajeev, about what will it take for trades, for instance, to take off, or actually less of collateral and more of cash flow based lending, etc. Lots of changes need to happen at big levels, at the government level, at the banking level. We need banks to be stronger. We need 7-8 big players who can actually compete with themselves and therefore, get into technology in a big way. All that needs to happen. But the reverse can also work. Start from if you as a simple business can put up your hand, let's say in 6 months' time, and to open up all of my books to you as a banker, and there will be absolutely no hanky-panky. There will be no cash transactions. There will be no siphoning of money anywhere else. Even if it's a proprietary firm, I'm going to make life extremely clean for myself. I know it sounds idealistic, but I think it works. Look, formalization has been going on, right? From the time of demonetization, from the time of GST, and now this COVID-19 period, right? It's going to become the norm going forward. Might as well embrace it full time. Go formal, get good auditors, become absolutely clean, and therefore you'll have a far bigger leg to not only get an equity like Sucheta mentioned, but also get all the support from the financial institutions possible. So as a theme, becoming formalized, becoming clean and better governed, get in good independent directors, and run the company as if you intend to grow into a larger scale. You might have to give up some short-term things. I think it will play out in the long term.
Right. Along with that, Ananth, would you like to kind of touch upon what the digital transformation agenda ought to be? Because at the end of the day, if Demon and GST were the two disruptive forces earlier, this time there's a wake-up call, and that's that meme which clearly talks about who's responsible for digital transformation in your organization. Is it COVID? Any thoughts on that?
So I won't even pretend to be an expert on digital transformation, which is why I'm going to become obsolete pretty soon. But here are a few things which I think will happen. As Rajeev mentioned, right now, for instance, to get data on GST, you need the permission of the borrower, right? I can also tell you that rating agencies, for instance, sometimes struggle to get the full banking statements from the companies they're rating. And only 50-60% of the companies actually provide those data, which is kind of silly, bizarre. I think we will soon go to a place where there'll be no place to hide. If things are going digital, all of your transactions will eventually be, people can track it, especially people who are relevant stakeholders like that. So in terms of digital transformation, simple things that you could do as an MSME, cut all cash transactions below a certain level. Don't have a single cash transaction, above 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees. Take a number, right? Everything will be done on a digital basis. Keep records for everything. Move into a paperless, go along with whatever the government is doing in terms of making things paperless, etc. Your e-way bills, etc. Embrace it full time. So I think the bigger part on the digital transformation is the way in which you buy, sell, and interact with people. That's going to be a big transformation. So your earlier sales channels that you had, which is feet on the street, people going out and trying to get out business, might not be as relevant even beyond COVID-19. And so be ready for what could be a very, very different way. And by the way, I can tell you as a banker, I opposed digitization tooth and nail because I saw people's jobs being threatened. I said, my God, what's going to happen? Unless I have that nice touch of being able to see my customers and they love me, and unless they see me, they will not do business. All that is nonsense. Eventually we will all move to digital paths. And by the way, that will not mean loss of jobs. It will just mean enhancement of jobs. Our quality of jobs will actually go up over a period of time. So embrace it wholeheartedly. Don't worry about the consequences. Just don't fight the future. This is going to be there. Yeah. Embrace it wholeheartedly.
Rajeev, I know you think this is a thing that is close to your heart. Being responsible for crafting the digital strategy for RBL, and I'm sure you spend a fair bit of time thinking about what form and shape it could take. Give us a sense of what it might mean for smaller enterprise. And
so let me give you an example just out of our own journey. We were a very tiny bank. Okay, so in the scheme of things, relative to some of the larger banks, we use the technology and ecosystem approach. Okay, and this was fortuitous because it all happened when platforms like Paytm and Flipkart and etc. started forming around 2014. Now, if you think about MSMEs, today, what is the important thing for them? They bring something of value to their buyers, obviously. Okay, and they need a certain anchoring. In the traditional economic and industrial policy, we used to have this clustering approach. Clusters of auto, clusters of pharma, clusters of chemicals. Those are still relevant. And why clusters? Because they give proximity, buying and selling, skills, access to finance. Today, the clusters have moved beyond physical concentration to digital platforms. So if you're a seller on any of the 3-4 large e-commerce platforms in India, and we don't have to go far. I'm going to be a little controversial, but look at the success of the Chinese SME, and they've been at it for maybe 10, 15 years longer than we have had. And, COVID situations are different, but their resilience in the last few months has been far higher because the level of formalization has been far, far higher. So if you look at platforms, and, we're working with people who are aggregating purchases of Kirana stores. That's how small we can go. And we're using that data to build 15-day, 30-day working capital loans because these are fast-moving goods. Now, their access to finance is as challenged as any manufacturing SMEs. The second thing is today, digital tools are very, very cheap and can be deployed, just download on your Android phone. So we are one of the largest merchant acquirers in the country, and we work with a lot of fintechs. It's amazing the level of adoption we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, notwithstanding all the challenges around regulations, MDR, etc. The fact is, when more and more payments data comes into the system, you start forming a certain credit view, a certain flow view. That is exactly what happened in China for the last 15, 20 years. And then that helps you reach your customers, reach your employees. Pretty much today, a SaaS offering for an MSME or an SME on a mobile phone is extremely inexpensive. Actually, they will probably give it to you for free if you give them access to your data. And if you start building this repository, the access and the level of trust will only keep enhancing. And it's not a very expensive exercise as far as we are concerned. So I think this is where I think India needs to take more and more active steps. And again, there is a government element to it, but I think the private enterprise is doing a lot of good stuff. So, we work with a lot of fintechs and other aggregator platforms. I think this is going to be the future for India as long as the enterprises adapt to it very quickly. And everybody is using WhatsApp. So, today, a lot of services can be delivered on WhatsApp, and tomorrow maybe finance can be delivered on WhatsApp as well. So I think there is enough and more we can do, and that will form part of the credit data. That'll give us the confidence that this person is good for the money we're trying to give, because we've seen the payment track record. Now, I could go on and on, but I've got enough stories here which will demonstrate that the moment you do it, you raise the level of hygiene and trust manifold.
Yeah. And there are enough, like you said, the Chinese playbook on Alibaba and what that did to democratization of business, particularly in rural China, is incredible, right? And that's helped them enormously. And I think when I was speaking to Sucheta, you spoke about Alibaba as well, and trying to kind of open up new opportunities. I'll shift the conversation, if it's okay with everyone, to the last.
I would just like to add
sure.
that actually where we really need, there is a huge scope for B2B sites. There are very few sector-wise B2B. Because what happens is that, okay, Alibaba is there, the bigger ones are there, but the real for MSME, if there are B2B sites, sector-wise, there's just one India, one or two of them, that will be a huge help to their growth. Also, if they, there are these the bill discounting and the new fintech companies, which if they register with them, and for the marketing, if they go to the e-marketplace, it will be great. So the MSMEs need to go that way. And that will help.
I think some of that is clearly happening from what I can see. The partnerships between the banks and the fintechs are opening up, I think, new credit platforms, which are far more efficient and more user-centric in that sense. There are many such examples. I just wanted to focus on something that I'm acutely conscious of the time as well. This has been a great conversation. I wanted to focus on leadership and communication, the thing that Rajeev, I think, had raised, and listen to each of you. I'll start with you, Rajeev. One of the things that often tends to happen is that when the going gets tough, one thing that many small business owners tend to do is keep things close to their chests. They don't share bad news with people around them. And just imagine the added stress and anxiety that stems out of that. What is your thought on this in terms of how should leaders really, kind of lead in stressful times like this, and yet remain transparent and appear vulnerable?
No, so actually, Indrajit, we've been part of many conversations over the last several weeks. I mean, something like this, where, say, in the world of startups, we do a lot of work with startups, and many of them are facing challenges. So many industry, people who've been around, who have other experience and expertise, have stepped up to actually talk to them on a platform like this, okay? And the idea is you share those concerns, you understand those concerns. At some stage, we're now developing more closed networks where they can just pick up the phone or get on a webinar or a Zoom call and talk to us. And we are finding out, actually, we're also learning a lot from what their expectations are. And they're also able to convey and share what the challenges they face. And if you put 5 or 10 of them from different backgrounds into the same, panel or conference room, you'll figure out that a lot of the answers actually lie within them. Sometimes you only need to provoke, and you need to put some questions on the table. So I think a lot of that is happening. And I would encourage, again, FICCI Flow to take this platform into much more micro level, okay, where you can invite, almost everybody is now very, very proficient with these communication tools. Just get a few people together, get a financier together, get a VC, and just have a free-flowing conversation around 3 or 4 points, and let it be, and people will at least air their concerns, okay? And I think that is one thing which we have seen. And over and above that, what we started doing, and which is really for us was very, very important, we started doing some, series on business model pivots. Now, that was purely because we love working with startups. So we said, let's figure out people who use this opportunity and how did they do it. And we asked them to do it on their mobile phones. We took that, we put it on our social media channels so that everyone could hear and see, because sometimes it resonates with you. Hey, this guy also had problems similar to mine. So there are many ways in which we can make this learning available, to millions and millions of our, customers, our employees. And you'll be surprised that actually the more you share, you learn your problems are not like pahar, I mean, they're as good or bad as somebody else's. And we found that sometimes answers come by just listening to somebody else's issues.
Terrific. Ananth, do you want to add something to this, this part of the conversation about helping yourself and building communities of practice, of support, which is what I think Rajeev's hinting at, and encouraging the learning mindset and sharing?
I can't top what Rajeev just said. I think he put it extremely well. On the overall leadership question and the responsive question, I think here is where I would add to what Rajeev said. I think every leader has to start with the conviction that there is still a lot of positivity left. It might be in the medium term, but there is. I can't see any problem in India which cannot be solved. And if you're a $2,000 per capita economy, if there is any economy in the world which has the possibility of doubling and tripling that in real quick time, despite all the problems you're facing, it has to be India. The quality of the people, the quality of the resources we have, the opportunity we have is just immense. Once you have that clarity that the opportunity in India is huge, and therefore for every business person, the opportunity is extremely large, then it puts things into perspective, right? Yes, we have to understand that the context right now is extremely tough. You can't sugarcoat it. It is probably, as I said earlier, the biggest economic problem that we've ever seen in our lifetimes, right? You can't sugarcoat that. But there is a way out. It's going to be a long and arduous journey, but there is going to be a way out. If you have that clarity, then what you need is to do Winston Churchill style, we shall fight on the beaches kind of leadership. Don't sugarcoat it. It's going to be tough. But guess what? We'll work this one out. And the future is bright. And I think that absolutely is reality. There is no question about that, right? Now, in terms of communication, etc., I think what Rajeev alluded to is extremely important. There is a lot of expertise available in bits and pieces. And again, one positive part about the digital transformation which is happening is that it's a lot more accessible now. You no longer have to pay multi-million-dollar bills to get access to that information. Take help from people. Take help from institutions. Don't close yourself down. Don't say you have all the answers, or by the way, there are no answers. There are plenty of answers. You have to be able to take help from people, open up your mind, and as Rajeev said, share. Solutions will emerge as we go along. We will not get the solution right either at a micro level or at a micro level at first go. That's impossible. We will make mistakes, we will flounder, we will reset, but have that feedback loop to know what exactly the path ought to be. I think, a lot of companies that I speak to, by the way, say, listen, I've got to take care of my people. I can't, they've been with me for many, many years. How do I let go of them, etc., etc. It's a noble thought. And I completely empathize with what they're saying. At the same time, face the reality, as Sucheta said earlier, and as Rajeev said earlier, if you have to conserve cash, you might have to take hard decisions. This is so that you live to survive, and therefore you can employ a lot more people when you've come through the revival phase. So, be realistic, and if required, you have to take tough decisions right now. But if you have an open conversation with all your stakeholders, I think there's a lot of and people buy into that vision that you have conviction around, I think the things will work themselves out.
Terrific. I'll thanks for that perspective, Ananth. I'll take a couple of questions. I know we have about another max 5 minutes or so, less than that perhaps. There is a question from Deepa Agarwal, but I'm going to kind of paraphrase it about safe to assume that normalcy may not return before December 2021 because any COVID vaccine is not expected for March 2021. But without getting into the vaccine, Ananth, do you want to kind of take that in terms of when do you see this kind of settling down, if at all, and does anyone really have the answer?
I don't think anybody has the answer. Deepa's guess could be as good as anybody else's. We didn't talk about COVID, the medical situation at all. The cases are going in India, but I do see some silver linings as well. I think the way Dharavi is being controlled is a fantastic story. The way our medical response in terms of more beds being available, more testing, we're now over 3 lakh tests per day going up is also positive. So look, we don't know the answer to this. This could go on for a few quarters, it could go on for a year, we don't know. The only point of reference we have is a Spanish flu, which went for 2.5 years, which was a very, very long time. So the point is, that's why I talked about Winston Churchill. We don't know how long this is going to take. Begin there, be in the trenches, and be aware that it will be a lot longer than we bargained for. We can't guess, but prepare for the worst.
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe, Indrajit, if I can just make one comment to that. I think we certainly have to bother about the medical side very closely. But I think from a business perspective, we have to assume that volatility is here to stay. I mean, somebody calls it the new normal. The new normal is all about constant change. Okay. And constant change means that you really have to now get to the stuff Ananth and Sucheta and I talked about, governance, transparency, increasing digitization, connection, whatever. So I don't think even if you get a vaccine that you can now, the vaccine will come by March 21 and then everything will be back to where it was. It will not be. I mean, this is not just a thing. This is changing the slope of the way transformation and transition is happening. And I don't think we should assume that this is going to just stop the moment the vaccine comes and we are all safe from a medical perspective. I think it's fundamentally changed. The changes were already there, but we hadn't felt it. But now it's been, crashed into a few months. And I can quote Lenin, the bipolar of Winston Churchill. There are weeks when decades happen, and then there are decades where nothing happens. So I think this is clearly for us, it has to be part of the way we do business.
Right. So there are many questions on the bank schemes around for MSMEs. It's going to be difficult to, I think, cover that bit in this conversation now because that's very factual, and I'm sure the panelists can, take that offline, because having stellar panelists like this, it might as well get the picture. The specifics of schemes and stuff like that can easily, I think, get answered by any chartered accountant, or we don't need to necessarily bother the panelists here. But Sucheta, I think you spoke about the whole issue around networking, right? Yes. And that's something we touched upon very briefly, and not essentially holding everything close to your chest. The value of business networks. You want to just kind of close with that, then we'll.
In fact, I would like to add to Mr. Ananth Narayan's, give an example to Professor Ananth Narayan's talk on networking. At FICCI, we had I had somebody who was, he's into this BNI, which is a networking platform for business, and his inventory had got stuck with the government e-marketplace, the GEM platform. It was a 1.5 crore, but it was a technical problem, and he just connected with me because of FICCI. I knew the head of Maharashtra, and I just connected, and he got his inventory. It is a small amount but for a trader, 1.5 crores was a big thing. So just because he could speak in his platform, he could speak to his friend, and he could come back to me because he knew me. So there are, if you network, if you talk, it does happen. So I would suggest that all of you, all the entrepreneurs here, please get registered as MSMEs. Get onto your, the TREDs and the GM and the different schemes. Please apply for them and go ahead with them. It's a huge help.
Terrific. So I'll kind of now request each of our panelists to maybe spend a minute offering their closing comments on some of the things that have been discussed here. What stood out for them? Ananth, would you want to go first? What stuck with you? What stayed with you based on what you heard?
Sure. Very enriching discussion. It was really a pleasure to listen to Sucheta and to Rajeev. Lots stood out. I think the broad takeaway for me, at least, is that this is a crisis, and make no bones about it. This is probably the worst crisis of our lifetimes for many companies. But there are ways out. The ways out are both individual as well as working with the stakeholders, including the government, to survive at this point in time. Survival is a big part of the journey, right? It is, unfortunately, as you said towards the end, we don't know how long this will go on. And as Rajeev mentioned, even after this is over, we don't know how things will pan out. So the point is, surviving through this period is going to be a critical part, which will take a lot of our energy. But there are takeaways for the medium term as well. The point about networking that Sucheta made, the point about digital transformation and embracing digitalization that Rajeev talked about, and this point that all of us made about the need to enhance governance, use digital and formalization processes to chart a course for the future, along with a relook at your business model, because that will change as well. I think those are the key takeaways for me, at least.
Terrific. That's very well put. Rajeev?
With all of you, so thanks for that.
Yeah. Rajeev, would you like to go next?
To me, Indrajit, obviously what Ananth said, but equally importantly is the learning, sharing community bit. I think nobody has the full answer. We're all doing, learning. And the more we are able to do it and learn along with others. And, this is a great time where people are able to help you without any fear or favor. That's the best part. I mean, this crisis has actually brought a lot of other things, which as a humanity we were missing. So I think reach out, develop some network, and to me, that's one way of keeping your spirits and your ideas, and some business connections might come through, or certain things which you never thought were possible. And I think that is the most important thing. And talk to your customers, talk to your employees, and talk to yourself, and at least because that's the only way you yourself will cross this kind of challenge.
Absolutely. Terrific. Sucheta?
Yeah, I would like to just give some what I envision also, that just taking this back, agriculture, I believe that we will not just become self-reliant, but maybe net exporters. Manufacturing, I believe if the labor problem resists, I see a lot of robots coming, a lot of people actually going into robots. So that could be one of the things to tackle. And service, you're saying going local, but I think when it comes to service industry, we may just diminish. With SBI yesterday just saying that they're going to invest 1,000 crores in a software where people can work from anywhere and anytime. So then we become a little more diminished. So over this, so we are so there will be networking, but what will be really missed is the bonding, because the emotion and the personal touch only comes with the bonding. And so that is what will be, as soon as it opens, we hope the tourism Dubai has opened. So we hope that ending on a note that let's just let bonding also happen after networking.
Absolutely. I'm sure it will. And you can count on our digital natives, young digital natives, to find answers even to that. They're brilliant at it, and they'll find new ways to connect even virtually, right? So I think like to thank each of the panelists. I don't think there's any need for me to do a formal summary because I think the three of them have done a brilliant job. But what stood out for me is that there are enough silver linings. This is not a lonely journey. You've got, there are tailwinds, right? There is growth coming back in quite a few sectors if you know where to look, and you must look for opportunities. I think there is a recovery that might take time, no doubt. But if you get your house in order and do everything that the panelists spoke about right now, use this time productively, then you haven't wasted the crisis. You'll probably come out stronger, right? It will demand a very, very different kind of leadership model, which is, I think Rajeev, Ananth, Sucheta all spoke about it, much more inclusive, right? Much more bold. You've got to take risks. If you don't experiment, you will not be able to find the answers, because these answers are not going to be available in a textbook, right? There is no playbook. So if you're building the playbook, listen, learn, network, and be part of different communities wherever you can soak it in, right? So that's, to my mind, the biggest takeaway for me. Really like to thank the audience. I wish we could have taken more questions. I must apologize that we couldn't, but I'm sure this conversation can, I think, continue. Malu and her team can facilitate exchanges with the panelists. I've also shared some content with her, some multimedia stories that might stimulate thinking. But with that, I'd like to kind of hand over to Professor Ratika Gore to, for her vote of thanks. Thank you so much, the panelists and the audience.
Thanks, Indrajit. It's been such an interesting conversation, and it's always, you already thanked all the panelists and the audience. I'd just like to actually also thank Malu Natarajan for taking the initiative in this front. This is a great initiative. In fact, part of the mission statement for our SP Jain Institute of Management is influencing practice, and I think these conversations are a step in that. When when there's conversations and there are more ideas which come, and these ideas can actually help practitioners. So in that sense, I do want to say thanks to Malu. I think FICCI Flow and SPGM is a great collaboration. It works with us, works on a mission statement. Of course, it gives me personal pleasure. Rajeev, of course, I love listening to you. But I also realized that I'm connected to the rest of the guests as SP. Ananth is, of course, a friend and a colleague. Sucheta and Indrajit both are alumni. And thank you, the FICCI Flow community who are attending this session. And of course, my colleagues. I know several of you are there in the audience today. So thanks for joining in. And watch this space. We have another one coming soon on family-run businesses. And I'm sure we'll send you the details soon on that. So thank you again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.